What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of NYC Crime Spot. Today we find ourselves outside the confines of NYC and into the area of Copiague.
Copiague?
Actually, it's pronounced Copiague, Long Island. I debated on pronouncing it wrong, just so I can get a couple of you in the comments section spurging out over it. That's always fun. But we'll keep it legit. Copiague, Long Island. Copiague, Long Island. And if you saw the thumbnail of this video, well, you get an idea of what we're talking about. Today we're talking about good old Cousin Joe, Old Man Joe, Dracula, Joseph Guglielmo. Interesting guy, this Dracula, huh? And, you know, not many people discuss Joseph Dracula at length. There's a lot of preconceived notions about him. What was he like? How many violent incidents was he involved in? Well, the truth is, on that front, we will never know. But we do know some things, and those things I'm going to be discussing with you all today, out here in Copiague, Long Island. We know that on October 21st of 1970, Joseph Guglielmo, who at that time was 42 years old and living at 784 Linden Boulevard in Brooklyn, well, he would make his way out here with 31-year-old Robert Marshall of 955 Grand Street in Brooklyn and 27-year-old Paul Salina of 1969 Oakdale Avenue right here in Long Island, in the area of Wantagh, Long Island. Wantagh, Long Island, over there by Jones Beach, for anyone that's familiar. And what these geniuses would do is they would come out here to Copiague, Long Island, and make their way to the address of 1550 Great Neck Road, which at that time was called the Security National Bank. A little building constructed in the 1950s, which is now a supermarket. That's where we're heading today for the first part of our story, ladies and gentlemen. Let's cross over. We have the Copiague Long Island Railroad Station here. Let's go check it out. We got ourselves a little Veterans Memorial section triangle over here. Let's check that out. Let's get ourselves a little America. All right, let's see what's popping over here. So we have a World War I memorial here. All right, very nice. World War I. Let's see if there's something on the other side of this. I'm not sure. Should be double-sided. Yeah, it is. More World War I. So this is kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, the downtown area, the Main Street area, so to speak. So this is a cool little statue right here. American, let's see what it says. It says American Warrior. This statue is dedicated to those in uniform who served and continue to serve our country and protect its freedom. All right. So, as I was saying, Joseph Guglielmo, Robert Marshall, and Paul Salina would make their way to 1550 Great Neck Road, right here out in Copiague. And basically a series of circus-like clown events would occur, and we're going to go over that. But what I really want to do is I want to talk about Joey Dracula for a second. So let's take a walk and talk about Joey Dracula. Let's talk about Cousin Joe. Roy DeMeo's Cousin Joe, the one-time occupant of the apartment over on East 41st Street, the back apartment of the Gemini Lounge. So Joe Guglielmo, basically his whole life, he was a criminal. Essentially his whole entire life, in and out of jail, been a criminal, doing stupid shit. So he was actually, for those of you who don't know, he was actually born in Italy on November 13th of 1927. So he was not born in the United States, but he had come here as I can't say exactly when, but I'm guessing probably a child, if I had to imagine. Probably came here as a child. And as I mentioned, many of you know he is the cousin of one Roy DeMeo. Now his criminal record dates back to 1946, when he would be arrested for unlawful entry. In 1948 and in 1951, he would be arrested for assault charges. One of those charges was assaulting a police officer. Crazy Joe, what are you doing, man? Beating up cops now, huh? Moving forward, he would be arrested in January of 1958. Now listen to this story. He would be hit with a number of extortion charges. You guys are gonna like this one. So what Joey Dracula decides to do, he and three other of his friends, who I'm going to talk about, they had convinced this woman by the name of Anne Godfrey to visit a doctor's office, the office of Mr. Barnett Blander at 1666 Pitkin Avenue in Brooklyn. And basically what would happen would be she would go in there, do her doctor's appointment, and what would happen was later on, two individuals would go back there. An individual by the name of Salvatore Macaluso and Anthony Calzaretta. And they would go back there and be like, "What's the matter with you, doctor? You assaulted my wife," you know, in a certain way that I can't see on YouTube. "You assaulted my wife." And they would actually beat this doctor up. Now later on, Anne Godfrey would reach out to the doctor in his office and would say, "Hey doctor, you know, this whole thing could go away for $5,000. We'll make this whole thing go away like it never happened." And it did never happen. They were making it up. So Dr. would reach out to Dr. Barnett Blander, would reach out to his buddies in the district attorney's office and be like, "Can you believe what these people are trying to do to me? Can you believe this?" So his buddy in the district attorney's office would say, "Well, what I want you to do is I want you to play along. And I want you to set up this meeting, and we'll set up the meeting, and what's going to happen is we're going to have detectives in your office, and when they come in, we're going to take these guys down." Essentially, that is what would happen. On January 10th of 1958, Anne Godfrey, Salvatore Mancaluso, and an unemployed Joseph Guglielmo of 149 Rochester Avenue would storm into the office to collect, only to be greeted by detectives. Their silly scheme was thwarted. What a scheme, huh? That was like an early Me Too scam. So they would get in trouble for that. Actually, Joseph Guglielmo would be the only one denied bond because he had such an extensive criminal record already. So he was into all types of sick activities. I mean, to me, that's sick. You want to frame a doctor for something so heinous such as that and then try to get $5,000 out of him. Now, by the 1960s, he was at it again. In the late 1960s, he would be arrested once more for promotion of gambling and possessing gambling records. I guess he was trying to be some sort of half-ass bookie or something. I don't know. Or maybe Cousin Roy was trying to put some money in his pocket, which is, I don't know, maybe that's probably the situation more so. This was an event that he was arrested and picked up for in 1969. How old was Roy? About 29, turning 30? Yeah, Roy had some money in his pocket. By 1969, Roy had already bought his first house in Massapequa, and he was making some bucks. He already built his first house, my mistake, in Massapequa at this time. So Joe was unemployed and was a loser. His cousin Roy had already built his first house, imagine that. But as I mentioned earlier, on the date of October 21st, 1970, Joey Dracula would really do it this time. He would really do it this time. When him and his cohorts, Robert Marshall and Paul Salina, would come right here to 1550 Great Neck Road. which is El Bravito, El Palacio de la Carne. It is a marketplace out here in Copiague. As I said before, this building was constructed in the 1950s. So this is the building, ladies and gentlemen, that once held the Security National Bank. Now it's important to know also that Robert Marshall and Paul Salina were actually out for a bank job that they committed just 3 months before this incident. And somehow they hooked up with Cousin Joe and they ended up out here. Now they would rent a 1968 sedan and they would pull up over here at around 9:40 a.m. Let's cross the street and get a better look at El Bravito, El Palacio de la Carne. We'll go into the parking lot. Maybe we'll walk through the parking lot and we'll make a little rounds over here once I am able to cross the street. All right, crossing right over 1550 Great Neck Road. Let's go through the lot and we'll make a turn around. So these three individuals would arrive here at 9:40 a.m. in the morning, and they would make their way inside this place and say, "This is a stick-up," to the 13 employees who were inside this bank. And what would happen is, oddly enough, now I said earlier that this was a bit of a clown show, and you're going to see exactly why I say that. So when they come in there, obviously they probably produce some weapons, they do this, they do all that. Now the first thing that's going to happen is Paul Salina is going to run in there and he's going to try to hop over a glass partition inside this building. Instead of, the glass partition that would separate like a teller from like the customers. Now instead of hopping over successfully over the glass partition to the other side where the tellers are, he's going to smash right through it. He's going to smash right through it by accident. And he's going to gash his wrist open while attempting to attempting to, I guess, he thought he was slick, he thought he was being sleek, hopping over the partition. Not so quick, Mr. Salina. Gashed himself open. These individuals would continue going about their heist, their robbery in front of the 13 patrons. Ultimately, what would happen is they would make out with over $9,000 in cash. They would head into their automobile and they would escape. Now, I put that number, like 9,000 something dollars, into like an inflation adjustment website. I put it in two different ones. And 1970 to today, that is like the buying power of around $75,000, according to two different websites that I sourced for the inflation calculator, basically. So let's get across the street. Actually, no, let's get a little look up close to this thing right here. So at one point in time, these three buffoons, including Joseph, Joe Dracula, Cousin Joe, Old Man Joe, Guglielmo, these guys would come in here 9:40 a.m. and make off with some cash. Now we're going to cross over to the street over here and we're going to discuss a little bit more, and then we're going to head out of here and we're going to go to part 2 of this clown show bank robbery, which takes place around 10 miles away from here in the town of Melville, Long Island. So these individuals would escape, they would make their way out, they would hop into their rented green 1968 sedan, and they would make their way down this road here, Great Neck Road, at speeds as high as 120 miles an hour. And they would be spotted by an officer. Obviously, when they ran out, the bank manager or the teller, they rang the alarm, the bank alarm, so authorities were alerted that something was going on at the bank. And they would leave, like I said, at speeds of 120 miles an hour. And after heading this way at speeds as high as 120 miles per hour, they would be spotted by an officer. An officer who said that he had seen them going north on Wellwood Avenue. And that Wellwood Avenue is going to take them into the town of Melville, where this whole thing is going to fall apart. And if you know the history of Joseph Guglielmo, some almost 9 years later, with the Dominic Ragucci incident, along with his cousin Roy DeMeo, which we won't get into, but some of you know that incident that happened as part of the Cuban crisis, when he was thought that Ragucci was a Cuban hitman, but he was a vacuum salesman, an 18-year-old vacuum salesman, a poor young teenager. And cousin Joe and Roy chased him for miles through Long Island before catching up to him, and you know what happened after that. Now, after these guys are spotted, police would continue to follow them for close to 10 miles into the town of Melville. Reports at the time say like over 12 miles, something like that, closer to somewhere around 10. Now let's get into Melville, Long Island, and discuss part 2 on this story of Joseph, cousin Joe, old man Joe, more popularly known as Dracula Guglielmo. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are in the town of Melville, Long Island. I filmed a little bit of the ride, well, a lot of the ride on the way here, just to give you guys some of the view of some of Long Island, maybe some of the view of what these guys might have saw as they're traveling 120 miles per hour through these streets. Now, what's going to happen is that they're going to get into this town of Melville, and they're going to reach the intersection of Walt Whitman Road, the great poet Walt Whitman Road, and Old Country Road, which is right ahead. And an officer at the time would say that he was sitting in his police car not far from that intersection, and all of a sudden he sees this car fly by, hit a railing, and flip over on its side, and 3 men came flying out. Now at this time, ladies and gentlemen, there had been a bunch of other officers following this trio, And there had also been a helicopter following them. So this turned into a no good, very bad day for these three. So we're heading to that intersection now where this event ended. Out here in Melville, Long Island. I hope everybody's enjoying this. If you are, please give us a like. Well, give me a like. There is no us. It's just me on this channel, in case you didn't know that. Give me a like. Give me a subscribe if it's the first time you're here. If you really like me, why don't you leave a comment? Thanks a lot. So here we are, approaching the intersection of Old Country Road and Walt Whitman Road. So this car up ahead would hit a railing, kind of like those railings you see over there on the side where it says Sorella's Restaurant, kind of probably something like that. Flip over on its side. Out come Joseph, Joe Dracula, Guglielmo, and Robert Marshall, and Paul Salina, two guys who 3 months prior to this incident already robbed a bank. And they got caught. And they were out on bail. These frickin' losers, what are they doing? Look at this building, huh? I like this old wood over here. Huh, I don't know what's going on with it, but pretty cool. Pretty cool. It looks like it says Ariana's Carriage House. All right. All right. Interesting. All right. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, at the intersection of Old Country and Walt Whitman, where it ended for these three. Now I'm going to put up some photos, perhaps some photos some of you have never seen. There isn't many photos out there of Joey Guglielmo, huh? You're going to see one right now. Crazy Joe. And then we're going to talk about a couple other things. So here we are, Walt Whitman Road in Old Country. In some of those photos you will see that sign for 110 that you see up ahead over there. You see that? 110 north, 110 south. You'll see that in some of the photos as well. So here we are. This is where it all ended, when these nut jobs came flying over here, hit a railing. Apparently a helicopter landed on a grassy knoll. Now, a lot of this area has changed. A lot of developments out here on Long Island. So some of this area has changed. There is a building in the photo. Not sure if it's that building there. I looked into the property records of this building. This seems to be newer than that, so I'm not sure. Seems to be like a building where there's some cars pulled up in front. So I don't know, but nonetheless, this is the intersection where these three individuals crashed on their side. Let's go up this way to the left. We'll get a look from down on this end. We'll walk through the neighborhood of Melville for a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about Joey Dracula. Here we got ourselves an old little rustic style gas station here. Pretty cool. Let's go look at this place. Pretty cool. Look at that. I like it. I like it. All right, let's go walk into the neighborhood over here. So after this event, these individuals would try to make a run for it. And as they're making a run for it, the cops draw their weapons, and Robert Marshall is going to get hit in the shoulder. He takes one to the shoulder. He's going to the hospital. And let's not forget that Selena gashed his wrist open in the bank trying to be Mr. Slick, hopping over the glass partition. Didn't work out. So we're walking here in Melville. See a lot of American flags on this little journey that we're taking. I know that's kind of weird. I've noticed that it's kind of weird for people overseas, and maybe in England or the UK or other countries. They think, no, I'm not speaking for everyone, but a lot of them think it's a little odd, the constant expressions of patriotism. I don't know, it's just one of those things. What can you do? What can you do? So, yeah, beautiful neighborhood here. Look at this. So let's talk about this case a little bit. So obviously these guys are going to go to trial. It's going to be, I believe, an 8-day trial. They're all charged with federal charges for robbing a bank, and they're going to go to trial. And during this trial, we are going to learn a lot more about Joseph Guglielmo, and it's going to be kind of disturbing. It's going to be so disturbing. He's going to cause so many disruptions that during the appeals process, after these two are sentenced, after these three are sentenced, Salinas and Marshall would be upset because Joey Dracula was so crazy that it made them look even more crazier. Obviously, they already robbed a bank. Now they're robbing another bank 3 months later on bail. Yeah, they're nuts, but clinically insane, psychotic, mentally unwell. There was no signs of that in them, but there were certainly signs of that in Joseph Guglielmo, and it did not make them look good, and they were not happy about this. Now, there was other reasons for appeal. There was a problem with one of their attorneys where I think it turned out like something crazy, like Selena's attorney was not even a real attorney, and he was like some fraudster or something. He was like some fraudster or something. I don't know. They would get lengthy sentences, you know, due to the idea that they were out on bail and they're robbing another bank, so they would go away for a while. Now, in order for you guys to really get a good idea of what was happening inside Joey Dracula's mind, I think what we need to do now, as I do sometimes in these videos, is kind of discuss some of the language, some of the things that was spoken about during the trial, during the appeals process, and how Joseph Guglielmo was described and some of the antics that he was partaking in during his time on trial for this bank robbery. So let's step away from the streets real quick and let's go to the tail of the tape.
At the suppression hearing conducted April 1st, 1971, appellant Guglielmo accused the government of lying and sought to dismiss his assigned counsel because he suspected that the lawyer was a government agent. Later in the day, the trial judge concluded that although the report from the medical center was positive in its opinion as to Guglielmo's competency, after viewing this defendant, I am not sure at this point that he is competent. The trial court granted Guglielmo's motion to appoint a private psychiatrist to examine Guglielmo, and ordered that the doctor be given the complete medical center report and informed of Guglielmo's courtroom behavior. The examining physician, Dr. Smith, reported, "In short, Mr. Guglielmo showed extremely uneven performance, not characteristic of any psychotic syndrome, but indicative to me of his malingering mental illness. In my opinion, Mr. Guglielmo is competent to stand trial, and that he shows good understanding of his legal situation, and the capacity to cooperate with his attorney in his defense. However, I anticipate that Mr. Guglielmo is likely to continue to display disruptive behavior in a conscious effort to confound legal process." At the commencement of the trial, the judge ruled that Guglielmo was competent on the basis of the doctor's reports, and concluded that there was no need for a hearing on the question. Neither the defendant nor the government requested any hearing. Guglielmo created several disruptions during the 8-day trial. There were several outbursts when he directed obscenities and accusations toward the court, witnesses, and the prosecutor. On one occasion, the court ordered Guglielmo removed from the courtroom, and there was one instance when he chose to absent himself. At one point, he requested that the court just sentence him and spare him the unfair trial he was receiving. On another occasion, Guglielmo hurled a water pitcher at the prosecutor, and later threw a chair toward the jury rail. Finally, during the summation by Selena's counsel, Guglielmo cut his wrist, and also cut his tongue, and purportedly attempted to swallow the blade. He was removed from the courtroom and taken to the hospital, and was not present when the judge charged the jury or when the verdict was returned. After Guglielmo's attempt, his assigned counsel informed the court that according to Guglielmo's wife, he had tried this on 4 or 5 other occasions. While at a federal medical center, he had told one of the doctors that in 1965, after a drinking spell and an attempt on his own life, he couldn't remember anything and was confined to a mental hospital in Brooklyn for 6 months. Apparently at that time, he was diagnosed as a psychopathic personality. Prior to being sent to the Federal Medical Center for the competency exam, Guglielmo apparently made an attempt to slit himself again. When he returned there upon completion of the competency exam, Guglielmo reportedly attempted to do this again. It is relevant to note that on several occasions he maintained that he could remember nothing about the events which immediately preceded his arrest. So just so you know, ladies and gentlemen, I changed some of the language there in order to make it YouTube friendly. So you can use your imagination as to what Guglielmo was actually attempting to do to himself. If you want some of the stuff, maybe send me an email. I could send it over to you. Now let's get back to the street.
So pretty crazy stuff from Cousin Joe. Pretty crazy stuff, as if you guys didn't think he was already unhinged just based on maybe reading Murder Machine or hearing about him. Now you know he's unhinged, right? So eventually Guglielmo would make his way back into civilization. He would be given the chance to come back into the general population of New York City. And he would take up residence at 2084 East 41st Street, the back apartment of what was the Gemini Lounge, the headquarters of his cousin, Roy DeMeo. And I'm pretty sure Guglielmo comes back into town somewhere around 76, I believe. So he goes away for a little bit, comes back into town. So his cousin Roy is 36 years old at that point. As I mentioned, by the time Joe robs this bank, his cousin's doing very well. He's making a lot of money. He already has built his own house in Massapequa. And by the time Cousin Joe comes back around, Roy sets him up in this apartment to get him straight, to help him out. Now, Roy is quickly becoming a Gambino crime family heavyweight. At this point, he is already a multi-millionaire. He is getting ready to build an even bigger house on Whitewood Drive in Massapequa Park. He's absolutely loaded. He is already partaken in numerous violent acts. However, what we know as the Murder Machine, the most violent era of this crew, has yet to take part yet. And Joseph Dracula Guglielmo would be there to take part. Now, from what we know, what we're told, what we're led to believe, is that much of the incidents that would take place in that apartment around in the late 70s to the early 80s, much of those incidents, it is assumed that Joseph Guglielmo was present for many of those incidents. For many of those incidents in which the Gemini method took place, he is accused of doing some heinous things. He is accused of taking part in the depravity. This is where he would obtain the nickname Dracula. Now, I would ask my friend Pete the Pick LaFrocia, about him on more than one occasion. And the thing that Pete tells me about him is that he was just a very weird guy. He was pale, very weird guy, looked a lot older for his age, and he was just weird. I mean, he said we called him Dracula. He says, I barely ever seen him come out of that place, which would be a good reason to call somebody Dracula, right? Now, later on in November of 1983, when they would serve a warrant at 2084 East 41st Street, the FBI and the NYPD, when they would arrive there to serve the warrant to look for evidence of blood, evidence of discharge of weapons, evidence of how many times was this place painted, all of the intel that they were receiving from the informants, Joseph Guglielmo would be there. Now, this is where you see that photo of him sitting at the table in the kitchen there. That photo is from when they served that warrant in 1983 at the back apartment of the Gemini Lounge. Now, not long after that, after he is indicted, he's indicted with everyone else. They were accusing him of doing all sorts of heinous things, and whether he did them or not, you know, he's there, right? Check the FBI files. He disappears. He becomes a fugitive for a while because they can't prove that he was taken out and this and that. So he becomes a fugitive. And there's this stuff, if you look in the FBI files, where they think he's been cited here, they think he's been cited there. Now, according to the former district attorney of the Southern District of New York, Walter Mack, who worked heavily on this case, he would get an anonymous phone call, according to him, claiming that Joseph Guglielmo was living somewhere in, I believe, Newport News, Virginia. So they would follow up a tip on that. Nothing ever came of it. I believe, I don't know if it was Pennsylvania, there was another spot where he was apparently spotted. They were getting all these hints that he was a fugitive and he was hiding here, he was hiding there, but nothing would ever come of it. Once again, we're at the intersection of Walt Whitman Road and Old Country Road. So nothing would ever come of it until today. I mean, we could only assume that he probably got taken out. Now, I would ask Pete the Pick LaFrocia about this, and he would tell me, well, he probably turned into a bat and disappeared. And to be honest, out of all this insanity, sounds pretty reasonable to me that Dracula would just turn up into a bat, fly away, and you'd never see him again. Perhaps hiding out in a cave somewhere. We'll never know. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of NYC Crime Spot, which has taken us outside the confines of New York City and into Long Island. I hope all of you have a beautiful week. Hope you enjoyed this upload. If you did, please leave a like. Please subscribe. And let everybody you know that you think would enjoy this content to head on over to my channel and check it out. Thank you all, and have a beautiful week.